and Insights. Today I want to welcome you to a webinar with a great panel of folks to talk about the recent global summit that we had in Scottsdale, Arizona on September 10th and 11th. And we're going to talk about the insights from the summit, how people felt, what they were able to get from the summit, and really share their insights. Today I'm joined by Allen Dow, Vice President of Logility, Kevin McPherson, who presented at the summit, Vice President of Global Solutions, Owens Minor, Chris Schult, Vice President of Supply Chain Operations of WR Grace, and Dave Winstone of Dow AgroSciences. So if we can unmute our participants now, what I'd like to do is have each of them tell the audience a little bit about themselves. So Allen, can you give the group a little bit about your background and what brought you to the summit?
Yes, certainly, Laura. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to participate with this panel. I've been with Logility for about 15 years now, so it's my exposure to the supply chain. It's been a wonderful time period. We've all gone through a lot of different things during that time period, some ups, some downs, and challenges. Logility is a supply chain solutions provider. We serve customers globally and many different aspects of the supply chain. The summit for me, Laura, was an opportunity to go and meet and spend some time with our peers in the industry and start to hear about not only things that are happening today, but a great set of speakers that were also sharing some insights about things that are coming in the future and made us think in a different way. So it was a pleasure to be there and join those peers in the industry to really hear some of those thoughts.
Thank you, Allen. And Kevin, how about yourself? Tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what brought you to the summit.
Thank you, Laura. Kevin McPherson, Vice President of Strategic Solutions at Owens Minor. I'm a lifelong logistics operations and supply chain person in the healthcare space. 12 years in the veterinary pharmaceutical ethical market. 12 years at UPS Healthcare Logistics, developing supply chains for biopharma and med device companies. And the last 2.5 years at Owens Minor, which has given me an opportunity to look at the front end, or I should say the back end of the supply chain, moving products into acute care hospitals, ambulatory surgery centers, and now into the patient. So over 26 years, I've gained a lot of experience and intellectually challenging myself to help the healthcare supply chain, and certainly Owens Minor, position themselves to lower the cost of health care via improving supply chains, from manufacturing points right into, in some cases in our orthopedic space, implantation into the patient and beyond. So my interest in supply chain insights, and certainly the conference, was to learn, interact, and obtain knowledge from individuals in other industries that could help our organization take historical lessons learned and apply those to the healthcare supply chain, primarily around data interchange, consolidation of activities, and really, I guess, lastly, just kind of break away from the normal day-to-day and allow some visioning to take place and expand my thought process, which I certainly achieved at the conference.
Well, thank you so much, Kevin. Chris, how about yourself? Can you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about why you wanted to come to the conference?
Sure, Laura. Chris Schult, head of operational supply chain at Grace. And I'd like to thank everyone for teaching me as I was there. I've just entered the supply chain world in Grace. I've been with Grace for 14 years, mainly on the business side, and most recently came into the supply chain group. I really went to the summit to make contacts, see where other businesses and companies and technologies are heading, and to really help me start to formulate the journey of developing the strategy of our supply chain here at Grace. It was a great event, met a lot of people, realized that many other people in the world have gone through the same place we are, and I wanted to learn from where they are and what they've learned and what they've had problems with along the way, and make sure that we can learn from other companies that are out there.
Thank you so much, Chris. And how about you, Dave? Can you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your reasons to come to the conference?
Yeah, thank you, Laura. Good morning, everybody. Dave Winstone. I work as the Supply Chain Expertise Center leader in Dow AgroSciences, and Dow AgroSciences is a wholly owned subsidiary and business unit of the bigger Dow Chemical company. I have had 29 years of experience in industry across purchasing, manufacturing, but predominantly supply chain. The first part of that in Europe, and the rest inside of the U.S., most of it in the Dow AgroSciences business unit of Dow. I think my reasons for coming to the conference were primarily to push my own thinking on our journey to supply chain excellence, and I certainly achieved that learning from others, both the positive successes they'd had and some of the failures or difficulties they'd had along the way, and so it really helped me expand and push my thinking in terms of that journey to supply chain excellence.
Okay, well, we always do some feedback. We ask people, their impressions of the study and impressions of the event. 44% in the study said that, the conference was excellent. 88% it was excellent or good, and 73% said that they were likely to attend. Alan, what were the highlights of the summit from your perspective?
Well, Laura, the information that was presented there predominantly around your study about driving the supply chain to improve business performance. That's really what we're all about, trying to serve with Logility, our customers, for my peers here, for their companies, the folks that they work for, and trying to move that forward and improve the business operations and serve the industry and serve the world in general. And as we sat and listened to others talk, it was interesting to hear about the accomplishments and also the challenges. And many times over, we're seeing that one of the big challenges is people and the ability to really leverage the talent that we have in supply chain and put those folks to work. And for me, it was starting to draw out this explosion of information and what that means to the people that are working day in and day out to manage the supply chain. And how do we drive that forward and make sure that they're able to do their job most effectively and improve those metrics that you're measuring and presenting and sharing with us, Laura. That's probably the big theme. And it's a matter of maybe making those people more efficient, more effective, letting them leverage the data that's at hand, both for short-term planning and reactionary activity and long-term planning. It's also about trying to help them optimize the supply chain and improve it. We've got to keep moving that forward as we go through these business cycles that we'll continue to face as time goes on, and the economic challenges and the global uncertainty that's out there. We've got to be able to react to all that and really directing people in a way that helps them be more efficient and effective. I think that was the interesting themes. There's more to come. There's more challenges, but there's been a lot accomplished.
So Kevin, how about yourself? What was the highlight for you from the event?
Yeah, this was kind of a learning that I did not anticipate, and it was quite eye-opening and from the context of healthcare, right, which is a complex and ever-evolving supply chain where change is not really welcome sometimes, right? It has to be driven in force. So as I listened to what I'll call the analytical methods, the SCI index, the methodologies and tools used to quantify a supply chain, it occurred to me that two things. One, that change is really driven around the ability to take that information and formulate it into a message that resonates with the individuals who have to adopt that change and make that change work. So the whole, what I'll call quote-unquote selling aspect of the mental model is again, a common sense statement here, but is more important than the conclusions that you draw from the data itself. That was the primary. And the secondary one, it occurred to me again that our challenge as supply chain leaders and where we fit in organizations and how we drive change, in my situation is understandably difficult because we're A, developing the mental models, B, we must move thought and move individuals within our own organizations across functional boundaries to adopt that mental model and move it and change it. And then once that's accomplished, you have to go out into the world and go through the same process with, A, the different stakeholders that have to drive that change, but also the functional areas within each one of those stakeholder groups. So that vision and challenge kind of came very clear to me on the whole humanistic side of driving change from the mental model through actual implementation.
Yeah, you know, I don't think we have a lot of clarity in some organizations around that mental model, and the marketing and selling of that mental model, I think, is difficult for many. Chris, how about yourself? What was your primary goal and what was your takeaway?
I mean, it was to learn what other people are doing and really start to build that mental model and strategy in our company. And I think you read a lot of textbooks, you listen to a lot of people talk about what an integrated supply chain is and what end-to-end management is and how supply chain is tying all the different functions and silos together. And until you see a company get up there and talk about the journey they've been through, it kind of opened my eyes to what it really means. And you can read as much as you want or listen to other people, but you can see a couple of companies like Colgate or Flextronics that go through there and really show how it's embedded within their overall business culture, and you see where you really want to get to. So now I sort of see where I want to get to. Now I have to work on the journey to get there.
Yeah. Dave, how about yourself? What was your primary takeaway?
Well, I think I took something out of almost every presentation that was there. Some of that was good stuff in areas expected, and some of it wasn't. I'll be honest, I hadn't spent a lot of time thinking about things like robotics and self-driving trucks and things like that. So there was some surprise insights that I got around things like that. But hearing practitioners stand up and talk about the journey that they've been on, the length of that, some of the difficulties that they have, and I think it's the need for the interconnectedness of all of that. I think that's the key. I know one of the phrases that I must have written down half a dozen times during the conference was, portfolios of projects don't cut it. You need an integrated design for how you're going to approach this. So that was probably the biggest single thing for me.
And it's easier said than done. One of the things we did for the conference was we really wanted to ground people with where we are. So on the first morning, we launched the Supply Chains to Admire. And this was the end of a 2-year study where we've taken all publicly held information and we've looked at our companies making progress on what we call the effective frontier of growth, return on invested capital, operating margin, and inventory turns. And, when I wrote the book Bricks Matter, I thought that we had made a lot more progress than what I found. And so what we did was we tied this up in a way to look at both supply chain improvement and also performance. And we listed 15 supply chains for the period of 2006 to 2013 that had actually driven averages in those categories of return on invested capital, operating margin, and inventory turns to a higher degree than their peer group, and also had driven progress for the period faster than their peer group. And we talked about the drivers of this. What did you feel about this report, the methodology, the sharing? Dave, I'm going to pick on you first. If you can just share, what did you think about this analysis?
Yeah, thank you, Laura. It was really interesting. I think the orbit charts were the highlight of this. I know you've been working on those for a number of years, and being able to visually see this intersection of operating margin and inventory turns, really helped bring out the importance of that as a strategic goal to achieve both in the way that you're managing the supply chain. I think as being part of a big complex company in Dow, and you use Dow as one of the companies that you highlighted there. Sometimes in terms of a big multi-business unit companies, it's difficult to see and understand what's happening in there. But I think it's been very helpful for us on a business unit level, and we've managed to take advantage of the service that you've offered to do a business unit benchmarking. And we found that very useful to understand our position relative to what we consider true peers in our industry, and to understand our relative performance and where we can do better from that perspective.
Thanks. Chris, what did you think of the methodology? Was it helpful? Any feedback for us?
I think it's interesting. I mean, it's always a challenge to try to compare companies and where you are, and internally you tell yourself stories about all the great projects you've accomplished and where you've moved and what you've done, but until you really benchmark that against other companies and where you sit and what best in class looks like, you realize that I think we all have something to work on. And as you talk about the balancing between profitability and inventory turns and margins, it's not an easy thing to do, and I think that really points out that there are very few people out there that have found the secret sauce to keep improving year after year.
Yeah, you know, particularly operating margin and inventory turns. Now, you know, Kevin, no one from healthcare made this list. What did you think of the methodology, and what do you think about the fact that no one from pharma or medical device made this list?
I think healthcare doesn't follow normal business, what I'll call the financials for healthcare don't follow other industries on a comparable basis. And what do I mean by that? That the increment or the upfront investment in capital, research and development, this is a long process, right? I'm going to develop this project over 5 or 6 years, or this drug or this device, and I'm going to have some payback over time. And manufacturing cycles aren't necessarily tied to demand. Inventory is more expensive than most other industries on a per unit basis. So it doesn't surprise me that they don't make the list. And my takeaway was just that, right? Is this the right methodology and process for healthcare? I lean to that left side of the balanced approach when I looked at this, because in healthcare inventory turns is an investment. One can invest in higher margin inventory items to drive demand in healthcare and correlate to higher operating margins. So it is a product category by product category decision, but the reason I lean to the left is it always comes back to return on invested capital, which correlates to earnings per share improvements. But it's complex as you move from commodities to higher end implantable devices, for example.
Absolutely, and we're continuing to refine the methodology for 2015, and we have a strong bias in the methodology to look at it by peer group, and there's a lot of data we did in the healthcare industry, so you know we want to get it right. Alan, what are your thoughts here? What did you think of the methodology, and what are your insights?
Well, I like the methodology, Laura. It's very interesting, and for me to see that as you span across time, you think about the time periods where you were able to gather that data on most companies. There was an awful lot going on, and it leads me back to really two observations. And one is that improving the supply chain is a journey. It's not a project. It's not a one-time event that you can call it done and dusted and put that behind you and move on. It's a matter of continuous improvement, and that journey is really starting with what can you accomplish today. And Chris and I had a chance to share some thoughts over lunch one day at this conference, and it's really about getting started and managing scope within the resources you have in your organization, and then have a plan for next year how to take that further forward and whatnot. So it's a continuous improvement program. But the other thing that was interesting, the second observation, is that we really need to have a responsive supply chain. As we work with customers, we look at 3 different phases of their supply chain. One is, what am I doing inside of lead time? What am I doing on that sales and execution range and in the short term? And then I've got the regular cadence around the S&OP processes, and how am I going to balance the supply and demand, and how do I stimulate demand where I've got excess inventory, and how do I shift focus where I may be constrained somewhere. And then you've got the long-term business plan, and you really need to establish a platform for making those business decisions that's common. You may leverage the data differently based on what phase of that planning cycle I'm in, but you really need to use that to drive that improvement process and be prepared for those economic and supply chain challenges that are out there. We can never predict all of those, so we need to be prepared to react when they come and surprise us.
Yeah, and we definitely need to do that. So one of the things we did was we gave everyone that attended a paperback book called the Shamans Journal. And next year for the event, we'll actually be writing the case studies of all of the supply chains to admire. And I'd like to proudly announce that Joan Mossinger from Seagate has been my first acceptance for speaking at next year's event. And so we're extending invitations for the supply chains to admire leaders to speak at the event for next year. And I'm excited to have Joan be the first to accept. So, you know, one of the things at the event was, you know, we really wanted to be about supply chain leaders sharing their stories. And so part of what we did was we had people that were drawing the event. And the theme of the event was Imagine the Supply Chain of the Future. And each day, and morning and afternoon, we would capture the insights of this particular session. And so in the corner, we have Dave Beeger's operating strategy and the work that Campbell's had done. And Campbell's had actually been making great improvement through 2012, but then made some mistakes and stubbed their toe and doing network design and also trying to do implementation of advanced planning too fast with too few resources, and Dave shared that. And then we also talked about the supply chain index and what is happening, and we had Laura, who's a wonderful economist from Stanford, used to work on the Obama Council, come and talk about global economics and what was happening there, and we talked about the supply chain index. So Dave, what spoke to you from this morning's session? What were the highlights and messages, and what was the buzz at the break table?
Thank you, Laura. Yeah, I think, you know, Laura's presentation really got us open up and expanded, thinking about everything that had happened and what might happen in terms of the global economy. And I think, you know, the key message resonating out of that was you got to think globally and you got to expect ongoing volatility. You know, however well we think we can forecast the future, it's unlikely to play out that way, so be ready for that. I think, you know, Dave Beeger's presentation from Campbell's was one of the highlights of the whole event for me, and I got a few key things from that. You know, he talked a lot about leadership, and that being the key to making sure you think holistically and are able to change from that vertical siloed approach to a much more holistic approach. He talked about that the fundamentals matters. You still got to have operating excellence in each of those areas. And he talked about the importance of declaring those breakthrough goals, so kind of putting that stake in the ground that gets everybody driving towards that in the future. So I think those were the key highlights for me from the first morning.
Great. So Chris, how about yourself?
Yeah, I agree. I think Dave's talk was very enlightening and kind of showed the journey that they embarked on and how they set the goals and worked on the path, and really how he had the strategy and the metrics, but more importantly kind of went back and looked at what they needed to change in their manufacturing and production process in order to get them to those goals, and laid out those investments and worked through those and went along this journey. And also, as you stated earlier, they implemented an advanced planning system too fast with not enough resources, and that's something that we're embarking on, and that's something I've kind of made sure we're slowing down and making sure we make the right decisions and we're not going to make the same mistakes. So that was a good learning for me. And I think Philippe from Mattel was interesting because we're always talking about how we balance the kind of the 3 or 4 things and the cost, the inventory and cash and against revenue and customer service levels. And the key thing that I learned, kind of got out of that, was figure out what the most important is in your supply chain and work to drive that while stabilizing the others at a level that is acceptable within the organization, because if you try to drive all 3 of them at once, you tend to get out of balance.
Right. Yep, I love Philippe's insight, and I love Dave's Beeger. You know, so few people will stand up and talk about when they stub their toe. Everybody wants to get up and talk very proudly about what worked. Kevin, how about yourself? Highlights, key messages?
Yeah, so the highlight for me, which was really the warehouse of the future, and one of the highlights, let me say. And the reason why that presentation was so intriguing to me is because when we're developing strategy, you're trying to get this vision of the future, right? And then you back down to the timing and applicability of the application of those ideas. So I going into that session, I really hadn't thought out that far, and many members of our team had not thought out that far as to where we're going, at least as far as we can see today. And then kind of bring that back to reality, and how much of that can we adopt, and when can we adopt that? So I thought that was fascinating, and one of the key values to me of the event itself, right? To push us outside of our normal thought process, to think far beyond where we actually can go today, and then bring that back to kind of our mental and physical timeline for implementation towards evolution. Again, all with the objective of trying to not match the competition, but to get ahead of them, right? So that we're taking the next step that they can't see, and then they're chasing us.
Yeah. Alan, how about your thought, morning of the first day? Key takeaways, highlights?
Yeah, for sure. Laura, as was said earlier, there was something in every presentation, and in some cases there was so much in every presentation it was almost overwhelming. But one of the highlights I thought was very interesting was the economist perspective that Laura presented, and far too often we swim in our own circles here. You know, we share all of our own stories, and we talk about supply chain, but Laura brought a perspective that was outside of the thinking that we do day in and day out, and how countries and the economies and leaders are actually impacting business activity and thus the supply chain, and kind of scared me a little bit, particularly when she started talking about the European economy going into stagnation, much like Japan has been in for the last decade. So it was an opportunity to sit back and look at the world from a very different perspective that I thought was quite interesting that morning.
Yeah, you know, and her point around forecasting and, you know, the need for sensing, I thought was very interesting. And then in the afternoon, we moved forward, and, you know, we had Philippe Lambat talk about what he called the iron triangle of how he balanced metrics. We had a wonderful presentation from Johnson & Johnson on the ethical supply chain and how could we have a supply chain without any kickbacks and really ethical behavior. We had the CEO from Flextronics who talked about contract manufacturing. We had a panel on analytics, and then we also had a panel on talent management. So I'm going to change the order here. Kevin, what really spoke to you on this afternoon? Kevin, you still there?
Sorry, I was on mute. I apologize.
Okay, that's all right. What spoke to you on the afternoon of day one?
Yeah, as we are in this space, the comments from J&J on the ethical supply chain were interesting to me. So as a service provider, we sit between healthcare providers and manufacturers, and each one of them has their own culture and their own bias or lack of bias towards ethics in the supply chain, ensuring global compliance. So J&J's insights in that area were fascinating and had a lot of applicability and learnings that I could bring back.
How about you, Dave? What spoke to you at this particular point in the conference?
Yeah, I think there was something out of everyone. If I had to pick a couple of the highlights for me, the analytics discussion was very relevant, and I think I took from that, one, you need to put that at a level where it can see across the whole supply chain, so you can get those analytics holistically, rather than kind of embed them in different functional silos. And then the discussion that started in analytics but led into the talent development around the need to kind of teach and develop the next generation of leadership. And I was particularly impressed with with Intel trying to get back into the university programs and trying to influence and help make sure that those programs actually develop the right talent, the right thinking around analytics of the future. And then the actual talent management discussion itself, I think highlighted the gap in middle management in the supply chain generally. And again, it's that need to develop what was discussed as the T-shaped leader, with enough deep functional expertise in one area, but that ability to put it into a holistic context by understanding all of the various aspects of the end-to-end supply chain. And so those really spoke to me in those sessions.
Chris, your thoughts here? What spoke to you in day two, or afternoon of day one? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think the one thing is the ethical supply chain. I mean, that really kind of struck me as we get more complex and we get more global in nature, we really need to understand the cultural norms within our supply chain, because there's many of countries and backgrounds that sometimes it's an accepted norm there to do certain things that as a U.S. or a global company that is not acceptable. And how do you instill that within the organization? How do you ensure compliance? And I mean, it was pretty amazing at the amount of time and resources that they had on their supply chain on the ethical side. And that's one thing that I think every company is going to be challenged with as we move forward to a more global supply chain where you're moving supplier bases and manufacturers all over the world. The second was the analytics. I mean, I think that's something that's kind of opened my eyes. Is we all have so much data, but be able to tie all that data together and provide insights to what that tells you versus just a data stream. And I think some of the methodologies and some of the ideas of recruiting somebody from graduate school or 2 years before they're going to start working out in industry, I think is a unique and kind of cutting edge thought process that we really haven't thought about here.
Yeah. Alan, your thoughts?
A couple. I would say that I mirror a lot of Dave's thoughts in here, but maybe from a couple of different perspectives. The first one was analytics. We've worked very hard over the last decade to try to improve what our user community has at their fingertips. Having that information, that visualization brings power to the user, and we're trying hard to make that happen. We're not there yet at the end zone, of course, and there's a lot more work to do. But having lots of data really doesn't do anything. You've got to be able to put that into action, and that was an interesting conversation from my perspective. But the second one that I found fascinating was the talent management area. And both from a professional standpoint and from a personal standpoint, I've got a daughter who's entering the workforce in supply chain soon, and it was encouraging to know that she's got a long, successful career opportunity ahead. So that was the personal side of it. But the professional side is, again, I mentioned earlier on, we have to really leverage that talent and make people as productive as possible. And the challenge that my peers in the industry have for us as a company, as a solution provider, is how do we help them make that happen, both with using optimization techniques, but also really making the user experience very rich, powerful, and efficient so that they can get their job done.
Right. So the first day was to talk about where are we, was to kind of set cornerstones around analytics, the ethical supply chain, what we measure, supply chain leadership, looking at the journey, supply chain talent. And then on the second day, we started with, how do we supercharge the supply chain with redesigning warehousing and transportation and the collaborative economy and digital printing and, defining the physics, the atoms and the electrons of the supply chain, and then how do we have it to be socially responsible? Dave, what spoke to you from this day?
Well, I think the robotics presentation was one of the highlights. Tom Bunkenberg is an excellent speaker. He's very, very engaging. Had a lot of really interesting, thought-provoking stuff in that. I think the concept of robotics and humans working together in warehouses was really interesting and pushed the thinking. Just actually seeing on video, driverless trucks going along the road. I think it was in Spain. He was showing that, and then he managed to sort of translate both of those together into a vision of what the potential might be from a logistics cost perspective, and gave a vision that said that, hey, maybe we can be getting 50% reduction, and that kind of woke me up a little bit.
Yeah.
To the fact that this technology is here, and that impact could be significant. Even in our company, I wouldn't say logistics costs are the biggest focus, but a 50% opportunity there is huge for us. So let's stay awake and look for and help develop those opportunities.
Yeah.
I would say, well, sorry, Laura.
Yeah, I wasn't very excited about manless vehicles until I heard Tom, and I'm like, 40% logistics reduction. Now I'm interested, and
Yeah.
as we deal with the driver shortage, I think it's very fascinating. And one of the speakers I'd like to get next year's conference is really someone from Google to talk about manless vehicles in greater detail.
That would be fantastic. I'd really look forward to that. If you can pull that off. So. If I had to pull another highlight out for me personally, it was Jeremiah. Again, another really enthusiastic, energetic presenter, and just how prevalent that collaborative economy is, and whether we're going to start to see that as an opportunity or we're going to sit back and wait and let it become a threat from a business perspective. And I took a personal note to go try Uber and Airbnb the next time I'm traveling as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for digital agriculture, it makes a lot of sense. Chris, how about yourself? What spoke to you on day 2?
I think it was the same. I mean, this was one where it kind of expanded my thought process entirely. These are concepts that I wasn't really thinking coming into the conference, sort of seeing like they're millions of years away, and it was interesting to watch the people get up there and talk about it, and the amount of energy and effort that they're putting into it, and it makes me kind of look at these as opportunities. And I think the crowdsourcing collaborative economy is one where I never thought about, and I'm still not sure how that could impact us, but it's going to have an impact, and knowing about it early is good to start on your thinking process. But I think on the logistics, the driverless vehicles, that one's an interesting one, because especially I think even more because we all just closed the quarter, and getting the amount of trucks and carriers you need on the last couple of days of the quarter is always a challenge. And if you didn't have to worry about that, it probably make everybody's life a lot easier on how to manage those logistics at the end of the month.
Kevin, now you had talked about the robotics of the warehouse. Anything else speak to you from this morning of day 2?
Yeah, so the presentation by Keith Holliday on packaging. So the honesty here is I listened to the first half, and then my mind just went into a vision, right, a mental model, to use the term of how if you look at the compounded growth rate of biopharma and the requirements around cold chain packaging, and there's 4 primary different temperature levels that need to be maintained, and you think of that on a global basis, there's an extraordinarily huge opportunity for organizations to innovate the global movement of temperature-sensitive products, and more importantly, put that on a closed-loop type of system for improving sustainability. So my mind took off on that, but it was a stimulating thought from Keith to a great opportunity that we can look at in our service offering.
Yeah, I think Keith has actually done one of the best jobs on S&OP and redesigning push-pull boundaries in supply chains. And, you know, I love the fact that it's translated into business results. So I love Keith's presentation. Alan, any thoughts on day 2?
Yeah, well, this from a personal standpoint, as an engineer and trained engineer, and technology is really always stimulating to me. I never miss an opportunity to walk a factory floor or go through a distribution center, and it's a chance to learn and share with others about what's happening out there. And as I start to think about the impact on the movement of people, I'll be driving around California for the next 2 days here, and I'll be looking for that driverless car or truck out here. Hopefully I'll get the chance to see one. But it's going to change the pace of supply chain. And as Chris said, it's not that far away. It's coming at us. And the pace of the supply chain is going to change. We need to be ready for that. The opportunity exists to be more responsive, more reactive in the supply chain. And that's just going to change things one more time. It's one more disruption that will be a positive disruption. And we need to be prepared to take advantage of that and be more responsive with our supply chain, leveraging some of that technology.
Yeah, and you know, Phil DePillins, who talked about digital manufacturing and you know, the work that they've been doing on really building out you know, the whole issues around, you know, the inner ear and all the work that they've been doing. I also thought it was interesting to really take digital manufacturing to the final state. Now in the afternoon we talked about value networks, and we started out with Colgate talking about the work that they had done on building supply chains globally, and Colgate has had 42 consecutive quarters of operating margin improvement. And then, Kevin, you were kind enough to present work you're doing at Owens Minor. We had IBM present the work that they were doing. And, you know, we wrapped up the conference. Dave, thoughts about day 2?
Yeah, I'm still staggered by the statistic you just gave us about Colgate getting 42 consecutive quarters of margin improvement. I just sort of sit back and let that sink in and realize what an achievement that is. And it was really fascinating to listen to Jose give us his presentation on kind of the way they had focused on that. I think they're leveraging their scale. I got several things out of that. The engagement of their people was really critical as a fundamental, and they talked about that in the fundamentals. And just you know, a couple of innovative ideas that they have, which I know I'm going to try and take up. You know, each of their plants, they put a table or a series of tables out to have them look at all the different varieties of the products that they were doing, and kind of the impact that had on getting the people engaged in standardization and product design and simplification of that. I think was a key in some of their success. And the fact that they had instituted what they called a Money Matters training curriculum, so they were educating the whole organization on some of the key financial concepts and the importance of being able to turn that into results on the bottom line. So those two things stuck out for me as being you know, key enablers that they were able to share, and I was able to take and leverage from this. And I have one other you know, huge insight was the stuff from Donnie from IBM. You know, that the ability to channel collaborate, and there were a couple of pieces to that. You know, there was the tool, the technology piece of that in terms of how to do it. That was one part of the solution, but also the cultural aspects. Once you start getting into those relationships, you know, what would obviously make a better supply chain in terms of the way that works, but how to make sure you can partner with the commercial organizations to allow that to become a win-win for both companies and something that's actually practical and implementable as well.
Yeah, the whole building of distributor networks and the management of price and volume relationships in the distribution channel. I think the IBET case study from IBM is a wonderful example of that. Chris, thoughts from day 2 in the afternoon?
I mean, the Colgate presentation it still resonates with me, and just how the whole culture, the training of the financial part of it. I've told the story on, as Dave just said, on how they lay out all the products in a room and people visually can see, well, there's 14 blue toothbrushes. Do we really need 14 different blues? That I've told that story probably more than anything out of this conference to people I've come back here to on how they're managing their complexity and everything else in their supply chain. I mean, and the results speak. I mean, 42 consecutive quarters. I mean, that still is hard for me to really put my finger on and understand and believe. But as soon as you listen to them talk and what they've gone through, it's all about everybody within the company is all tied together, and it's truly what I see is what you see as an integrated supply chain, an end-to-end process, and all the different buzzwords that are out there in the world. They're the epitome of what I think is one of the best supply chains I've heard talk about.
Yeah, they've done some fascinating work around human capital and building human resource capabilities within supply chain. And I've not experienced a company with as mature of finance, a supply chain finance organization. Often you will find a supply chain finance organization that's more of a kind of a gatekeeper or a controller of finance, but they're actually working collaboratively with the supply chain to enable those operating margins and those return on invested capital results in a collaborative way I've not seen in any other organization. And it's hard to get them to speak on stage about it, so I was excited to get them on stage. Kevin, your thoughts, you were presenting in this particular time. What were your thoughts from the second day and afternoon?
Just to echo the comments, Josue reminded me of the need for financial discipline when you are going through an innovation process or simplification or standardization process. That he reiterated a couple times that the turn in that organization was fundamentally around ensuring that the financial payback and return on investment was there for each and every project that they did. We can sometimes in our organization look to the innovative, look to the sexy, and sometimes overlook the prospective financial payback on some of those projects.
And the important. Allen, your thoughts on day two?
Sure. Well, Laura, of course, Kevin's presentation was the best in the afternoon.
Yep.
Since he's here with us on the panel, of course.
Thanks.
But, Donnie's comment from IBM, she made one comment that really stuck with me, and when she was talking about the data, the quality of the data, and the accomplishments they were able to make, and she confessed that their data wasn't perfect, and that's the reality out there in every company. The data is never perfect. It's never going to be perfect. And I think she made the statement something along the lines of, it's good enough, get started. You're running the business on what you have today. Get started and try to improve it. And I try to share that thought with people day in and day out because, if you wait for perfect data, the time will pass and you'll never get those improvements that are out there. So I found that just an interesting statement, and to see what they accomplished by forging ahead. And then the other one, of course, was sprinkled across a number of them, driven by Colgate, but the proliferation of SKUs and trying to balance that off really around differentiation of product and having a competitive advantage. And we're working with a number of folks today that are doing the scary thing of starting to work through postponement and then trying to differentiate product late, whether that's in a particular market or region or serving a particular customer, but holding inventory back and then trying to be responsive at the back end. And that's helping them, number one, get their turns better, but number two, really having the competitive advantage of having the differentiation and being responsive to the customer needs without having the most expensive high-risk inventory at the finished goods state all the way out in the supply chain. So I found that kind of interesting afternoon. It was a great wrap-up.
Well, great. Well, we're on a countdown for next year's event. It's September 9th through the 10th, 2015, again at the Phoenician. We will continue on the theme of Imagine. We'll redo the supply chains to admire. Hopefully people will give us feedback on the methodology. We'll be asking the leaders of the supply chains to admire, like Colgate, to give their presentations. We'll also be asking for technologists like Google on manless vehicles to come and join us to elevate the discussion. We'll continue with our public training. We have 3 sessions planned between now and next year's summit. and a monthly webinar series, and we will be interviewing all of the supply chains to admire on podcast. They're available on Stitcher and iTunes. We just published the interview with Joan from Seagate this morning, so they're available complimentary, free of charge for people to download. So Dave, any feedback for us for next year? If we were going to do one thing, what would you have us do?
I would make sure there's still plenty of opportunity for networking. That was the other thing we haven't really talked about here. The informal networking, I would say both with practitioners and also with some of the technology providers there. It's a great environment to do that. Make sure there's plenty of time to allow those informal interactions to take place.
Chris, any word of advice for us in next year's program?
Yeah, the talks were interesting, and I learned something from every one of them, but I learned just as much, if not more, from the conversations I had with people and either around the lunch table or out in the hallway, and I agree. I think that's an important aspect of this, and I think that's really what sets this conference apart from others. It's large enough that you get a nice group of people, but it's small enough that it can be intimate enough that you can meet almost everybody within the time you're there.
Well, great. And we design it so that people have networking event, and we have lots of opportunity for that. So we'll be sure to keep that focus. Kevin, your thoughts? Any one piece of advice for us?
No, I thought it was very well structured. I'll tell you what I did enjoy. I enjoyed the events around it, the exercise events, the hiking. I missed the 5K, but I won't if there's one next year. I thought that added the opportunity for networking, and I failed to fully take advantage of that, but I intend to next year. So keep those in the agenda. They're wonderful.
Well, thanks. We like having a little forced networking to keep people out of their hotel rooms and off their cell phones and talking to other people. Alan, any piece of advice for us as we put together the program for next year?
Great advice from my peers here, but just the one thing to continue, Laura, is to keep that variety out there. Make us think outside the box a little bit. The example with the economist this year, that's a different perspective. The technology components, the future technology components, and then some of those practical workings around what's happening today. That variety, I think, makes it a much richer event. So thank you for pulling that together this year, and we look forward to next year.
Well, great. Well, all of the presentations are available on our website at supplychaininsights.com and also our Global Summit site. You can see both the PowerPoint presentations, and for all of the presenters that allowed us to videotape, you can actually see the rendering of the video. And we encourage you to play those, to share them, and also the visual facilitator image that unfortunately wouldn't load here at the end, but you can see that image, which basically takes all of the essence of the event and captures it into one image, which is really around how do we imagine the supply chain of the future, one that both delivers the financial results in a deliberate and reliable way, a supply chain that's ethical, a supply chain that drives continuous improvement, a supply chain that can use new forms of advanced analytics, that builds the right human capital, that has established networks. We'll continue on this. We hope to see you next year at Imagine the Supply Chain of the Future, September 9th through the 10th, 2015, and we will be sending a save-the-date email second week in October, along with some of the networking highlights from a small session that we had on the ethical supply chain led by J&J, and also a session we had on SAP's architecture and the evolution of HANA and what people at the event thought about that and the continued work that's going on there. So for now, this is Laura Ciceri. I'll talk to you next time. Thanks for joining us today.